Hey, everybody, Patrick Connor here, and welcome to the Knuckles and Gloves podcast. We're doing a little bit more boxing history this week. I actually got a surprise episode, and I'm here with my dude, Brin-Jonathan Butler, who is, of course, author and filmmaker, trainer, boxing trainer to the stars right now, doing a little bit of Lewis-Klitschko.
I don't know which stars I've trained, but one day
I don't know. It's just one of those expressions you got to use to make somebody seem cool, you know?
I'm not cool, but yes, I'm excited about Lewis-Klitschko, Battle of the Titans, as it was called, June 21st, 2003 at the Staples Center. I think that this is one of the unheralded fights of the decade. And I know that sounds like total hyperbole, but if you watch this, I mean, even Merchant says this is Gaddy Ward at the highest level in terms of weight and stuff like that. 500 pounds of men in this ring, largely because Lewis is fighting at 256 and a half pounds, which is interesting because it's like he was 249 against Tyson, but it's a very different Lewis. So I think this fight on so many levels is interesting to revisit because Klitschko was so dismissed after dropping out of the fight with Bird because of a shoulder injury, which was far more severe than anybody really took seriously. The odds going into this fight, I've seen it various odds presented, but it sounds like it's between 4 and 5 to 1 that Lewis was going to win this fight. I think Klitschko maybe is one of the great heavyweights in history in terms of just line him up with any other heavyweight getting into the ring, who wins. I think he's one of the hardest outs that has ever been in the heavyweight division, in my view. I'm not saying his accomplishments deserve to be up there at the top, but I'm just saying put him in, his intelligence, how competitive he is, how dangerous he is, and he's just a very, very difficult proposition for anybody. And Lewis, I think, also might be one of the top 5 heavyweights of all time, and also one of the hardest people ever to get out. At his best, I like him against anybody. I think he was the most dangerous heavyweight that's ever fought, in my view. So, and the timing of the fight is so interesting. A year layoff for Lewis. So I think this fight, for anybody that hasn't seen it or is like, what the hell are these guys talking about? Well, what am I talking about? Selling this is a shockingly good fight with so many back and forths, and Lewis operating at so many different tempos, trying to contend with somebody who I think for the first time wanted it more than him in the ring.
Yeah.
And those are really rare to watch. Evander Holyfield fought a whole career where he only faced it once, which was James Toney, and he did not know how to deal with it. Lewis did know how to deal with it and pulled this fight out, but this was a really complex and yet totally compelling fight to go back to.
He definitely pulled it out. Lewis pulled it straight out of his ass. And some people are still pissed about it to this day because when I post about it or talk about it, there's always somebody like, yeah, well, if he hadn't totally eviscerated his fucking face, he would have won. Come on, that's how this goes. But no, it was a really good fight. It was a fun fight. A lot of people will say it was a sloppy fight. I'm not going to disagree too much. It kind of did get a little bit sloppy, but even so, you have, as you referenced, you have two guys who are, in terms of size, the size of fighter that could take on literally anyone in history, any fighter in history, and not be outsized, But then on top of that, you have two really big fighters who, after so many years and so many pundits and historians going like, yeah, they're big, but they fucking suck, Yeah, he's 6'6", but what the fuck, he's not very good. Nobody can be that good when they're that big. And finally, we do have a pair of fighters who are that good and are that big fighting each other for the heavyweight championship. And yeah, the circumstances are kind of wonky. The circumstances are kind of weird, but even so, the stars kind of aligned on this night, just for this night. And they aligned just right, man. It was a great fight. And the kind of, there are some subtle shifts in momentum over the fight. And I think that you also got to see, as you also alluded to, a Lennox Lewis that was a little bit different from other versions of Lennox Lewis that we've seen for a host of reasons. So, I mean, it was just a really good fight. I have a lot of, like I was saying earlier to you before we start recording, fond memories of this fight and watching it. And then, in like the weeks and months afterwards, downloading it and showing it to my friends and going, check this shit out. Oh my God, look at that cut. Holy shit. It was good stuff.
I mean, if you're somebody who celebrated Fury Wilder 3, if you're somebody who celebrated Bo Holyfield,
Guilty and guilty.
Ron Lyle, and George Foreman, this is a
Check.
bigger version and a more skilled version than any of those, I would argue. And I think with more nuance, with more, uh, Kate, as you say, there are subtle changes and there are sea changes, and you're just seeing both guys tested so much in this fight with this bizarre outcome, which is the series that we're exploring is controversy and the different manifestations of controversy in fights that make it so contentious about, as you say, what would have happened. And yet, one of the reasons I found this really interesting to revisit is because everybody has pointed out this is the only fight where Lewis was behind on the scorecards when he won. I think the only other time he really had trouble in a fight was Ray Mercer, like anywhere close to this much.
Oh yeah.
The pressure, and Mercer was fucking badass, just a beast of a fighter. But there's something just really intriguing to where Klitschko was going with this, where he was so intent on sort of redeeming the family reputation. His brother is there in the corner. The two brothers, it's so interesting just because I remember Freddie Roach telling me once, he said that catching hand pads, Vladimir was by far the hardest hitter that he ever worked with, way harder than Tyson, he said. But he said Vitali is a much better fighter. He's not as good an athlete, but he's a much better fighter. And when you listen to the commentators in this fight, they're so dismissive of Vitali. And like, this is a guy, like, for people who don't know, the Klitschkos, their father contracted cancer as a result of cleaning up Chernobyl. He was like triaging Chernobyl as a Russian soldier. These are brave, brave people. like
Yeah, they don't come from opulence, or it's or some nobody's been putting baby powder on their ass their entire lives. It's
no,
these are tough dudes. And Vitali also had a long amateur career and an amateur kickboxing career for a number of years. So
right.
he's not just some random ass stiff. And I mean, I actually had to laugh because if you look on YouTube, you can find the full broadcast, like the lead up to the fight. I just don't remember watching that because the clip I downloaded after the fight was just the fight, and that was it. There was no before or after. Maybe the post fight interview. Point is, I don't remember having watched it in a number of years, so I watched it, for the talk we're about to do, and I was cracking up because, man, this was when Big George was really just starting to fall apart as a commentator.
Oh,
Jesus Christ, dude. They do the lead in, and Big George starts talking about getting a colon check and starts doing all this. I'm just like,
oh yeah. Oh no.
George, what the fuck are you talking about? He's talking about coming back and fighting Lewis or Klitschko. And I'm like,
No.
my
No, no.
God.
George has a better fight in just dealing with himself and the contradictions that he's espousing throughout the fight than the fight.
Yeah. Yeah.
George is the most schizophrenic that I've ever heard him as a commentator. And I
I
mean,
love Big George, but yeah, he was all over the place on this one. And
no.
maybe it was the idea of the fact that he's watching two heavyweights, and somebody's got in his brain that he might be able to fucking take on one of these guys or something like that. But oh my God, even that version of Lennox Lewis that looked like shit for a couple minutes there would have destroyed him. But one of the things that in the very first round, so we see Vitali Klitschko coming out fairly aggressive in the first round, and Lennox Lewis, he assumes an aggressive posture, in that he's not throwing a lot of punches, but he's clearly assuming like, all right, I'm going to come after you. And that was very not Lennox Lewis like. And one of the things that, going back to this George shit, one of the things he says is they're talking about, oh, we don't know why Vitali Klitschko's gloves are so low. That was his style, you guys. Just watch a couple clips. And number two, George goes, oh, well, they're low because Lennox Lewis is high, so you got to go low. What?
I don't know what the fuck. No, the other thing I think for people getting into this fight is, okay, it's June 2003. Lewis had destroyed Tyson by 8th round knockout a year earlier. Tyson rejects having a rematch, which I think tells you a lot about Tyson. A lot about Tyson. He doesn't want any part of going into that fight. So, like, as much shit as Riddick Bowe gets for ducking Lewis, Tyson did exactly the same thing. These guys knew how good Lewis was at that point.
Well, and to be fair, I think Mike had a lot of stuff going on at the
Oh
time
yeah, yeah,
too,
yeah,
you know.
yeah, yeah, yeah. But I think like when we hear about that they sparred in front of Cuss and Tyson got the best of him in the first round, then Lewis came on. Lewis always wanted the fight after he knew how to handle Tyson, and I think he just knew from that sparring session, yeah, I can do okay with this. Nothing against Tyson. I just think, I've been in front of Tyson. Tyson is half an inch taller than me, and I've been in front of Lennox Lewis. These are two different species of men, just in terms of size. Like Lewis, to be that size with the skills that he had and the power he had,
That's not fair.
it's not fair. And I mean, and also just implementing his strategy with Emmanuel Stewart in the corner, Lewis was incredible. And other than a couple of lucky times getting knocked out, which he both avenged, Lewis beat every man he ever fought. So we catch him at an interesting point. He's just about to turn 38 years old going into this fight. He's had a year break. He's gained a bunch of weight. He's supposed to fight Kirk Johnson, who gets a chest injury. I don't know why it's not a little more specific than that, but anyway, a chest injury. So Vitali steps in. I know Vitali has 4 different pronunciations of his name, but in this broadcast, they mentioned it will be Vitali, unlike in Germany. We won the war, so we get to, anyway. So Klitschko steps up. Lewis is dealing with a substitute. Maybe he'd been getting ready for Kirk Johnson. It's always very difficult to fight a Canadian. So, I mean, maybe he over-prepared a little bit in some senses. But you're getting a Lewis who's in a weird spot. And Lewis, after this fight, also is going to toy a bit with Klitschko about whether he'll give him a rematch. Oh, I think your eye needs some more time to recover. So you can tell that Lewis, while pulling this fight off, kind of knows the end is really near. He's got enough money. Lewis is not one of those athletes that we've ever heard about has had money troubles or whatever. So for all the things he gets criticized for being boring, probably another aspect of that boringness is his financial literacy and that he's not emotionally spending in any way. And last point before I get into the round by round is that Foreman said before this fight, there is a big chance for an upset. Now he's all over the map on everything. So it's sort of like Trump, like half of it is going to be true because he's calling every possibility, but he does mention that going into the fight. And an interesting other aspect to this is that Roy Jones has just won a piece of the heavyweight championship against John Ruiz. And you are actually going to hear in this telecast that Jones would stand a very good chance of beating Lewis after how bad he looked against Klitschko, which I think is the most mind-blowingly stupid thing I've ever heard. So yeah, and as you mentioned, George Foreman wanting to come out of retirement at 55. And mentioning all his annual physicals, stay away from my colon and that kind of thing. What I find crazy about this, before I talk about the first round, last thing, is that I gave every round of this fight to Klitschko. I gave every single round, and I don't remember it being that way, but we had the contentious stuff before with the other 2 fights that we've discussed where it's like I couldn't give it to Hagler or Castillo Mayweather. Every round of this fight, I could not give a round to Lewis, and I have nothing against Lewis. So first round, they look like 2 kids fighting, I thought. They're just bashing away at each other. They both look a little bit nervous with some flourishes of jumping in, but it looked like bumper cars to me. Like the style, they're just so big and just a little bit awkward. But I thought Klitschko's arsenal, his ability to land at range, and his punch selection, and also the tempo at which he's fighting, were something that you could see Lewis had never been confronted with before. He was flustered by it. And he also was aware that he was unable to physically dominate or mentally dominate his opponent, which he almost always could. And Vitali looked really happy to be fighting. He looked very game, and you could see that Lewis was kind of stunned that anybody enjoys fighting Lennox Lewis. And it kind of eked away a little bit at his confidence level. Vitali threw 73 punches and landed 23. Lewis only threw 29, or 39, but was a little bit more accurate, landing 18. But I think the activity of a man as big as Vitali 6'8", 6'7", 6'8", quite a diminished reach compared to Lewis, which is interesting as the taller man. But you can just see Lewis knows, fuck, I am in for a lot in this fight. This guy is not going away, and he hits hard, and he's landing against me in a way that men are not supposed to do when I fight them. So I was kind of just fascinated by how Lewis responds to this turmoil and adversity. And going into the next round, he doesn't really pick up the pace. He's pretty sluggish. So how did you score the first round? And tell me about round two as you saw it.
Yeah, I thought that that Klitschko should have taken the first round. Lennox Lewis, both of them, I will say, actually, both of them are natural counterpunchers. Generally, when you put a counterpuncher in with a counterpuncher, what happens is a shitty fight because neither one wants to lead and neither one feels comfortable leading. And there's a bunch of like, like a bunch of like range finding shit where it's just twitchy and fainty. And there is a fair bit of that in this fight, but you can also tell that it's like, I don't know who decided it first, but they both at one point decide like, we don't have time for this. Like we're going to try to win this fight. And Lennox Lewis in the first round comes out jabbing actually aggressively, which for him is not very like him. And that's actually one of the few things that George gets right in the commentating is he says something to the effect that he's surprised that Lewis is fighting this way because usually Lewis is more of a counterpuncher and he's leading a little bit more than he would, and he's surprised. And I think that also as a result, personally, I thought that what Lennox Lewis was doing was probably recognizing that he was out of shape, did not have a shitload of gas in the tank, and wanted to do some damage early to try to get this guy out of there. It's a last minute opponent, which, by the way, I will say this too. That's one of the kind of excuses or whatever that a lot of people say, well, of course Lennox looked that way. He was a last minute replacement. Bro, Klitschko fought a last minute replacement too. He fought him on the exact same amount of notice.
Yeah.
He fought Lennox Lewis you know what I'm saying? So, I mean, you kind of got to give it up both ways here, and you can't really nudge it toward Lewis for that. But point is, first round, Lewis is a little bit more aggressive than you would expect to see him, but he also started getting timed, and Klitschko found his range a lot quicker than Lewis did, which is another thing you're not used to seeing with Lennox Lewis. As soon as Lewis is trying to get in with his right hand, you can see a little quick little boop, boop, right hand from Vitali Klitschko that's like basic, nothing too weird, not a weird angle, but Lewis is just walking right into it because he's trying to be aggressive. So yeah, Klitschko takes that first round. In the second round, I thought it was a similar situation where he's again jabbing aggressively, Lewis that is, and Klitschko gets in with some good right hands, and he again starts in with a much better range on his right hand. He's clipping him with it like right on the chin, like bam, he's just not stepping into it at that point. But Lewis is already looking, pretty sweaty, pretty out of shape in the second round, I thought. So, I mean, it's a really good fight opening up already because already through two rounds, both big guys have landed some pretty big shots on the other.
Yeah, round two, I was really surprised, but Lewis looks sluggish as a response to the first round. He looks more sluggish. He looks lethargic and he looks frustrated. He's not really sure what the answer is to this guy. My notes had, he looked like a guy at the DMV waiting in line. Lewis
eating
just looks,
life.
Lewis looks perturbed by how game and brave Klitschko is. Vitali is effective in implementing his aggression. And Lewis is just unable to dictate the pace in the way that he's so good at doing against so many different styles of fighters. This is a guy Klitschko's got energy. He's in great shape and he wants to take that title. And you can see Lewis is like, oh, he is hungrier than I am, at least in this fight. Outside of the ring, Lewis's size, he's carrying more weight, he's older, and you're seeing that all kind of add up for the first time. That's not what you saw against Tyson. And granted, it was a shot Tyson, but Lewis looked fantastic in that fight. I mean, some of those combinations that he was landing against Tyson were incredible. And even when they're turning, he's getting first to the punch. And like, when you're that size, you should, and Tyson is so quick, or historically has been so quick. So I think what this exposed a little bit, which is rare for Lewis, is he looked arrogant going into this fight. And that arrogance is confronting somebody who really doesn't have any arrogance. This Klitschko knows how dangerous Lewis is, and he just doesn't care. He just wants it. There was a huge right hand landed midway through the round that clearly buzzed and wobbled Lewis. That was pretty shocking. Like, if he was able to just get one more through, I think he could have put him down. The crowd immediately is hugely involved in this fight. I think they were expecting something a lot less, as you're saying, like a chess game or something like that. That is not what this is, even though both of these guys are very capable of fighting that way and prefer to fight that way. But for whatever reason, the chemistry is such that people start suspecting, you can hear it by the buzz, that this is going to be something special. And this is even more interesting because Lewis looks incredibly heavy on his feet as he's moving around the ring. Lewis was no Ali, but Lewis could move a lot more effective than I think any of his opponents thought. Not here. Lewis is able to flip the momentum with a perfect stiff jab at various moments in this round. So again, you're seeing another side of this fight that's so interesting.
Yeah, it's like he's, sorry to interrupt you, but it's like that phrase they use in boxing, keeping someone honest. Yeah, it's like that's exactly what he's doing. As soon as Vitali starts getting whatever starts getting that momentum, Lewis is just like, bap, with a nice jab that stops. It's like, all right, let me reset here. Yeah, I noticed that too.
It's very interesting. And you can also kind of see Lewis is aware by the crowd's response that they are excited about an upset, about a very special upset that is unfolding. And like a champion, he responds by taking the fight to Klitschko. He is not willing to acquiesce, as Tyson did. Anytime anybody stood up to Tyson, he gave up. Ultimately, he gave up. He put up a good fight against Douglas. A lot of people don't give him credit for that. But fundamentally, there was a bully mentality that if I meet resistance, if I haven't taken you out of your game, I don't know how much is me here to really stand up to you. Lewis is an exception to that. And yet, as you're seeing him step up to try to win the round, try to set the tone of the fight, that I am the champion, I'm going to take control here. As Lewis is attempting to flip the momentum, there's a moment where they're turning toward the end of the round, and Lewis gets caught in a way that you can see, you're not supposed to be able to catch me as I'm turning to try to throw, because I'm so tall that I know my range, and yet you're just so much bigger and younger and more game, and he gets caught, and you just think, oh. And this is right at the moment where Merchant compares this to Gaddy Ward. There's a thrilling exchange to end the round. And I think what you're seeing, and this is true from the chess world, which I've unfortunately written a fair bit about, is this is what happens after regular chess ends and you move into speed chess. And that's what you're seeing, is two exceptional chess players forced to play speed chess against each other. And that's the way the rest of the fight's going to go. So I gave another round to Vitali, but I'm also just like loving what Lewis is doing to try to respond. Like, it's showing you so much of a side of Lewis that we hadn't seen before. So you're beginning to get a sense that this fight is something really special. So round 3, what did you see?
I saw the same thing as you did in round 2. Klitschko should have taken that round. And in round 3, I think that kind of becomes a theme in this fight, that it seems as though Lewis looks as if he's acknowledging, like, I'm in a rut here, shit.
Yeah.
But that he's also laying it out in front of everybody and saying, fine, I'm in a rut, but I'm willing to fight my way out. And that's not something you've seen of me. And that's something you guys have said for years I wouldn't do. So it's almost like, you talk about self-referential and stuff like that. It's almost like he's seeing what the crowd is seeing, almost like he's understanding, like seeing it from the crowd's perspective, like, should I better get into gear? But the problem is that Klitschko, going even into the 3rd round, and a little less so, Lewis starts kind of catching up. in the third round, in my opinion. But even so, Klitschko's still so slippery. He's so, and not in the sense that he's very defensively responsible or that he's a defensive master or anything like that, Nicolino Lachey or Willie Pep or something. It's mostly that he's awkward. He has a very strange and straight up style that the bad aspects of Vladimir Klitschko's style, Vitali makes work for him. Where Vladimir Klitschko's, they say he's robotic or very straight up, doesn't have good defense, etc. His older brother does the same kind of thing, except for he's far more cognizant of where he is, like in the ring. He's far more cognizant of what's coming back at him. And so Vitali has really tricky head movement, does a lot of weird shifting about and stuff like that when he's in. I think that Lewis just, they say that in boxing, a good example of this is when somebody's being really unorthodox, you need to like be ultra orthodox in order to fix them, in order to get them back in the line. And a good example of that would be Barrera Hamed. Hamed's moving all around and doing all this type of movement. And so Barrera just stays on the line. That's all he does the entire fight. Just stay right on the line and you're going to fucking get him. And it's the same kind of concept, except for this is a version of Lewis where in the psychological sense, it's like you can see that Lewis was up to fight Tyson. He probably isn't up to fight Vitali Klitschko, or at least not in this, under these circumstances. On the other hand, Vitali Klitschko is very much up to fight Lennox Lewis, and you can see that. And so I think that that dynamic going on in the ring is kind of funky. In round 3, about a minute into the round, after this kind of jockeying for position continues and Lewis is trying to kind of get a bead on Klitschko, he finally lands a right hand that splits open Vitali Klitschko's eyebrow. And that's kind of like the start of where, there's just a little crack. He just needs to put the wedge into that crack and just start fucking hammering it so the wall starts coming down. And it's like, it's going to happen. It's just, you only have a little crack right now. That's all you got. And that's what Lewis is working on.
Yeah, I mean, the other thing here, we have to mention the late Emmanuel Stewart says to Lewis, "You're losing, and you need to come out here and you need to assert. You need to take over.
This motherfucker's dangerous. You can't go out, just go and fight him.
You're fighting a dead man. Knock that motherfucker out." He's awesome. The other thing is that it's real. It's not Teddy Atlas performing, like auditioning. It's real.
We're on Broadway, and you're a dancer.
It's so painful. It's just so painful. What I love about Lewis here, Lewis absolutely listens to those instructions. Whatever fear or trepidation he has after 2 rounds, he comes out of the corner and just opens fire.
And I'm sorry, but there's even just a moment where Manny is like, "You're not doing all right." And Lewis is like, "Huh?"
Yeah.
Like, "What?" And Manny's like, "Buddy, you're losing."
You're losing.
And Lewis is like, "Fuck. All right, I guess I better get going."
No, and he comes out and he just really makes a huge effort to assert his will. And it's not in the kind of like Tyson way where it's like pretending to, like he really is finally like, okay, if I'm losing, do I want to lose? No, I don't. I want to fucking win this thing. I care about these titles. I care about my legacy. I'm going to come out here and I'm going to beat this motherfucker. I don't care if I'm out of shape.
Yeah.
I'm going to take this fight
really
over.
chucking.
Yeah. And so he comes out of there. And for the first time, you're seeing Lewis really clinging to the idea, I will win this fight. I'm not going to do what's been going on the last 2 rounds, where I'm going to survive and I'm going to stay in here. But now it's that I need to take over and I need to win. And I know I'm not in the best shape, so I probably have to do this. I'm not going to win a decision maybe. And that's not a place that Lewis typically likes to be in. Lewis likes to be able to make those decisions, but he's aware this guy wants to make that decision for me. He wants to either take me out or he's very capable of winning on points. And he's so much more active than I am. Can I really win on the scorecards? Because he's landing more, he's throwing way more. So you're right. That cut emerges over Vitali. That is, the major, it becomes the Achilles heel in this fight. and the action and rising tension just absolutely detonates the crowd. Now the crowd is not suspicious of a great fight. They know they're in the middle of a great fight, which is magical to watch, because most of boxing is, despite these guys risking their lives, can become monotonous very quick. And here we just don't know what's going to happen. And it's just really interesting just to see this crowd just get into this fight in such a big way, because Lewis is such a figure in the sport. I think with what he was able to accomplish, I mean, I think people were beginning to really say, I mean, as Foreman says, I would never want to fight Lennox Lewis. Like, I don't want any part of him, sort of thing. Like, he jokes about it at the end of this fight. So you're getting moments in this. There are little stanzas that are just tremendous brawls. It degenerates, but it also almost elevates it into something where two guys with such skill are just kind of throwing it out the window because they're getting lost in the excitement of the fight.
Yeah, you want to take it back to the alley? Let's take it back to the alley, dude. Let's go.
Right. So Lewis throws 39 punches this round, lands 19. Vitali keeps up a pace of 74 punches thrown and lands 29. And he's trying to land hard. These are not pity pat. These are, I'm trying to take this fucking guy out. So I'm just looking at Foreman's commentary. My note here is that this is where Foreman really becomes like he's in a bigger fight with himself over like what strategy to be implemented. Like the contradictions of Foreman are like the give and take of the battle with Lewis and Klitschko. It's bizarre, yeah. Like it's surreal at this point. You're trying to imagine the faces of Lampley and Merchant listening to Foreman. Again, I love Foreman, but
how many times did Larry just with his earphones on go,
"What are you talking about?"
What?
Yeah. So I gave another round. I mean, I mentioned to you the punch stats, and I think it's even more demonstrative when you're watching it. But I mean, I think you and I are on the same page. 3-0 Vitali at this point.
I thought that round 3, Lewis at least had an argument. And I think that, I mean, this is where the kind of like scoring criteria and whatever argument starts to come into play. I'm not really going to go into it. I'm just going to say that I think that for me, when it comes down to like punches landed and shit like that, it's sometimes difficult to know how much damage a punch does. Like it's really impossible to know. Sometimes it's visible, like a cut opens up. But in that moment, in that round, what does that mean? Does like, oh shit, he cut him, he wins the round? No, that's not what it means. But I think that Lewis definitely had far more argument to win the third round than any other round. It's just kind of like, you know, going off of the punch stats. I don't score off the punch stats, not saying you are either, but they are kind of like a good tool to kind of look at what's going on. And at the very least, whether or not you're looking at punches landed, looking at punches thrown is helpful. And you can clearly see that Vitali is outworking him, clearly. And you can also see it visibly, too. You don't necessarily need to look at the punch stats. Lewis is feeling the pressure, which is why he's applying the pressure, because he's like, holy shit, this guy's, you know, kind of just outboxing me and, you know, 1-2ing me to death here. What the hell? But yeah, I thought that 3-0 would probably be pretty fair at that point. Yeah, I guess it just depends on what you're scoring in that third round. But 3-0, yeah, sure.
Well, and I'm not saying that these are clear-cut rounds where Lewis is doing nothing. Lewis is doing a lot in all 3 of the rounds. It's just,
and that's what I mean is like there's that push and pull of like what you're scoring, or you know.
Yeah, and I mean what I'm scoring is who is dictating the pace of the fight, who's controlling the momentum, who's landing the more meaningful shots, and who is demonstrating more effective aggression. On all of those criterion, Vitali is not dominating the fight, but dictating the fight.
I would agree.
So that's where I'm going with this scoring. Is I'm not saying at all that even though I gave every round to Vitali that he dominated this fight. He didn't, but he dictated it.
I agree.
And I don't really see any round where it's like more than 90 seconds Lewis dictated. It's like Lewis would have 30 seconds or 40 seconds, but the rest would be Vitali pretty clearly. So going into the 4th round, it is abundantly clear that Vitali's eye is badly damaged. It is a horrid cut. And Lewis gets excited by this. Lewis clearly sees this as an opening to win, and it gives him some energy that you didn't really see him have in the previous 3 rounds, which is, again, another testament to him that he's able to deal with adversity and find a thing to focus on to motivate him to get the best out of where he is at that particular moment. So it's another aspect of this fight that I think is so fun to watch, is just to see this last chapter of Lewis's career, to see he still got something. And you saw it with Ali too. Ali was able to bring out the best of himself at moments of real adversity against many opponents that were dangerous for him. I mean, we throw around that Ali's the best ever, but Ali had hugely competitive fights with fighters that we do not consider even very good throughout his career. It's an interesting thing that we kind of neglect.
Those are forgotten, those slide in under the radar.
Right. The two fighters in the 4th round, Lewis is charging to try to score against Klitschko's eye. He's got a bullseye to try to land stuff. And at one moment in this round, both fighters collapse on the canvas inadvertently. It's a very clean fight, actually, but they both collapse. And it's one of my favorite moments of the fight, because for both guys, this fight is so important. But you see Klitschko offer a glove to pick up Lewis, to help pick him up when he's on the ground. And we see the opposite way too much in boxing now, where you kind of want to be celebrated for being a badass or not showing sportsmanship. I'm just very sentimental that I love seeing these moments between two guys that are beating the fuck out of each other, but there's still respect between the two of them.
If you look in the background, the crowd, like there's like a swath of the crowd that stands up and they're like, yeah, because it's nice. Like, oh shit, I didn't expect to see this.
It's a lot of guys get venerated right now. When they see a guy in the ground, they want to kick him, and we go, yeah, that's the killer instinct we want to see. I fucking hate that shit. So I like seeing this moment to prove that guys can be just as competitive as the kind of people who would kick somebody down, but also have decency and sportsmanship within the context of they're trying to kill each other. So I like that moment a lot. And Lewis is just pouring on pressure to try to take advantage of this cut. And to me, it reminded me, my last little comment is, in OJ Made in America, there's a moment where they talk about OJ Simpson being friends with Marcus Allen, and they challenge each other. Marcus, I think, challenges OJ, who's quite a bit older, and his knees are completely shot, to a sprint. And Marcus Allen is in the NFL. He's an active NFL player who's, MVP of the Super Bowl. OJ kicks his ass in the sprint. Just out of pride, he kicked Marcus's ass as an older man. And this is, to me, where Lewis is coming from. I know that I'm better than you, even though this version of me is older and I'm a little overweight, but I am I'm the Lamborghini here. And I don't fucking lose, sort of thing. So I love seeing that from Lewis, that his pride is allowing him to fight at a level that he really does not deserve to be fighting at, based on his
business fighting at. Yeah,
exactly. So it's just another little snapshot of this fight that to me is very special, that just reminded me of that OJ anecdote. Not to suggest that Lennox should be compared to a 2-time murderer, but I'm just saying in this one little way. So yeah, so again, 4th round, Vitali again, more active, and I thought just slightly took the round, despite Lewis really coming on. So 4-0 for Vitali still.
And one thing that we're seeing from both fighters is that they're both tired. And that's one of the reasons why they go collapsing to the canvas is, part of it is that they're big, so they collide and they're going to fall. But another part of it is that we're seeing Lennox Lewis going after Vitali, like you said, but also missing a bunch of, like, whiffing a bunch of punches, like not like by a little, but by a lot. Like there are a number of instances where he's like, woof, and Vitali's like not even there. And you don't see that kind of stuff from Lennox Lewis very often. And so here in round 4, you're obviously seeing two very big guys getting tired. And in a heavyweight championship fight, you don't want to see both guys getting tired in round 4. So, I mean, it's speaking to the pace in Vitali's case, but also the lack of being in shape for Lennox Lewis. But another aspect of this fight, a small aspect of this fight that kind of goes under the radar that I caught in real time watching it and was just like fucking horrified. And I mean, you probably wrote a note about this, I would imagine, because you're pretty observant and you're taking good notes and shit. But Fritz Zdenek, who is the cornerman for Vitali Klitschko and was in the Klitschko's corner for years and years, a very well-known German coach. And another kind of offshoot of this is that a number of times when a fighter has a team of people, quite often the trainer or the head trainer will also act as the cut man or has experience treating cuts, using the end swell, etc. Now, generally speaking, that's like something that somebody with actual medical knowledge should be doing. You shouldn't be sticking anything in a fucking cut or anything like that, or any wound, unless you have medical knowledge. But this is just the nature of boxing, going back many, many, many decades, where trainers would literally have a little bag full of their own fucking shit that they would mix together. So anyway, long story short, you have Fritz Zdenek in Vitali Klitschko's corner. And after Vitali Klitschko comes back and the cut has been worsened, Fritz Zdenek, for some ghastly reason, some reason that still is beyond me to this day, almost 20 years later, takes a terry cloth, a white towel, one of those white towels you can find in a pack for $1.99 at Walmart, in a pack of like 12, fucking terry cloth, and starts wiping at the goddamn cut, tears it to like twice as big as it was before. I saw that watching it live and was like, my God, what is he doing? Oh my God. Because the cut goes from like a fairly straightforward, like, just straight across cut that's a little messy, to this jagged fucking awful thing because he wipes it with a towel, bro. Oh my God. So, I mean, if I were Vitali Klitschko, I'd be pissed at Fritz Zdenek to this day. But between rounds, that's one of the things that you're seeing, is the difference between how Emmanuel Stewart is handling the situation compared to Fritz Zdenek. Holy shit, what a mishap, bro. So yeah, 4 rounds in, you got Vitali probably up by 4 rounds, but with a cut that's being worsened not only by Lennox Lewis's punches, but by his own goddamn corner. Poor guy. Holy shit.
It's a great point. And you're seeing Lewis confronting fatigue that's just completely unprecedented in his career. Totally unprecedented. Apart from the phone booth fighting that they're doing, where Vitali, I mean, in this 4th round, Vitali is throwing 66 punches. He's maintaining a pace that is now getting to be 2.5 times what Lewis is able to muster in response. But the fatigue is there. I mean, he is, and it's amazing to see, like, wow, I'm 4 rounds in and I look more tired than any 12th round I've ever fought. What is going on here? And this guy is in such good shape.
And he's not going anywhere. Like, I'm hitting him with some bombs. He ain't going anywhere. The fuck?
Yeah. And he knows that when he lands clean against me, that he shook me. I think Lewis is also dispelling in this fight the myth that he had a bad chin. I think Lewis had a very good chin.
Agreed.
And certainly his, while he's conscious, his willingness to take punishment, not like unnecessarily, but like it does not take away his will to win, to get hit. He's getting hit a lot in this fight, and he's coming for more, and he's still very determined to win. Going into the 5th round, Lewis, let's see. The 4th round I thought was the closest fight in terms of it almost scoring it even, but I still thought, just because Vitali was throwing so much more and still dictating, I had to give it to him. Lewis is still trying to rush. He's still trying to give a sense of offense, to create momentum, to maybe land something big. He's just not able to do it, or even when he does, Vitali has a tremendous chin. Vitali is somebody who's really never lost. I mean, the bird thing I think is bullshit. But Vitali, even though he did lose, there's a YouTube clip of him getting knocked out in kickboxing. He gets like some roundhouse thing, but he's not somebody, like, the mental toughness of Vitali is something I think is really underrated. He is just so here to win and do something extraordinary. And perhaps part of that is motivated by his brother getting embarrassed and humiliated. that when his brother loses, it's sort of like as if the family has been challenged. And also just the way that people read into what happened with Chris Bird about who Vitali was, which is so contrary to who he was, as he later demonstrates, that you're seeing just an exceptional show of just desire to assert in this fight. I thought Vitali was able to have real sustained periods of just throwing stuff where Lewis was just kind of like, boy, I'm in it for this whole fight. Lewis was unable to break the will of Vitali in this round and actually inspired more effort from him as he was landing stuff. So Lewis is coming on, but it's only bringing out an even better version of Vitali, which was interesting, which was also true, I think, in a fabulous way with Tyson Douglas, that as Tyson would really come on, and again, we forget that. We just think, oh, Douglas dominated the whole fight. He didn't. Tyson was winning on the scorecards in that fight. And Tyson fought his ass off in that fight. He took a savage beating, but he fought his ass off. When Douglas was knocked down in that controversial way, you see him pound the canvas in disappointment. And that's where if you're watching Douglas do that, you're not watching Tyson's response to seeing it, which is, fuck, he really wants to be here, and I don't want to be here. I was trying to knock him out so I could go home because I don't want to be here against this guy anymore. So there's something similar that happens in this round, which is really fascinating to watch, is that midway through, Vitali scores with a huge flurry that rocks Lewis, and Lewis is clearly gassed, but he is swinging in defense. He is still trying to come on and put Vitali away, but I just thought Vitali got the better of a really good series of exchanges throughout the round. So again, I'm up 5-0 for Vitali, even though it's not a dominant performance, but he's always just doing enough. And part of my defense of that position is that Lewis threw 43 punches. He's upping a little in this round, what he's throwing, lands 23. Vitali ups his total to 70 punches thrown and lands 27.
Yeah, I thought that round 5 was a round where Lewis started kind of showing that he was starting to get to Vitali inside, because Klitschko was actually starting to, rather than like, he was doing this stuff earlier on where he was like rocking back and forth using his head movement and stuff like that and punching between Lewis's shots. Whereas in the 5th round, he started really clinching inside. He was doing a really good job timing Lewis as Lewis tried to come in. And then from the outside, Lewis was just a hair like too short on most of his shots. He just couldn't quite reach Klitschko, who, between the height advantage and his movement, he just couldn't quite get to him, but he was getting to him just enough inside. And also on top of that, using, I talked about Holyfield earlier before we were recording, but using his head. Lennox Lewis starts actually using his head inside and putting his head into Klitschko's cut and shit like that in the 5th round, where he's clearly kind of like, trying to worsen the cut and, like, using his gloves, doing this shit, pushing his face away so that, he can potentially worsen the cut. Like, some pretty veteran, somewhat dirty shit. But is that enough to give Lewis the round? Potentially. I thought he did some damage in the 5th. But I thought that clearly in the 5th round, he had started to come on and had an argument for that round. And I think I gave him that round, yeah.
I think Lewis has an argument for a couple of rounds. I totally concede that. 6th round, the fight's moved into a telephone booth. There is a vicious right hand that Vitali lands on Lewis. And Lewis is just showing, again, the chin is something special. Vitali, go back, YouTube search Vitali knockout reel. He lands cleanly on anybody, they're out. But it's not true here. He has landed cleanly a few times on Lewis, and Lewis is right there, totally game. Lewis is also in pursuit of Klitschko a lot of this round. Despite taking some of these shots, he is taking fire while he's in pursuit by somebody that is very capable of landing and has kind of timed him a little bit to get his rhythm. And then Lewis lands the best punch of the fight for him, an uppercut that is completely worthy of the Joshua Vladimir fight, takes Vitali's head off. It snaps back, doesn't go anywhere. Doesn't even seem that buzzed by it. It's a huge shot. Like, look what Lewis was doing to Tyson when he landed, putting him on the canvas, bloodying up his face. Um, Vitali reacts to taking this uppercut by, oh, that's a good punch to use, lands his own uppercut. And Foreman is claiming that Vitali is blind at this point. I don't know how he is able to get a camera into the field of vision of Vitali, but it's just another comment by George where it's like, really? Like, okay.
He's got diabetes.
Yeah.
He's just calling out random health defects.
So I thought Lewis had a great round here, some great moments, but I thought Vitali was able to turn the tide whenever necessary after taking a shot, did a little bit more, and wins the sixth round. The sixth round, as he has won for me every one of these rounds. And this becomes the last round because the fight is about to be stopped. It's, you know, and even the judge scorecards, I mean, what did you make when this fight was stopped? And I think it should have been stopped. That cut was horrendous. I'm kind of surprised they allowed it to go on. This was another round that I had almost scored even, but just slightly gave it to Vitali. But Lewis, 15 years after this fight, said unequivocally that Klitschko was the most difficult opponent of his career, which I think is important because he's not saying, oh, I wasn't in shape or coming up with excuses. He flat out just said on paper and who this guy was the hardest person I ever fought. And I think that's an important caveat to mention because anybody who's saying, oh, it wasn't Lewis, Lewis is not saying that. Defenders of Lewis might say it. He didn't say it. And then the judges, you know, they all had it the same score, I believe, of 58-56 for Klitschko. And the only one who didn't was Letterman, who was scoring the fight. You know, okay, Jim, it's even. So that
Got about Unified Rules Association of Boxing Committee. Jim.
So sounds like you're at 4-2 for Klitschko in this fight. Were you okay with the stoppage? Do you think it was reasonable?
Yeah, that's how I had it. I thought Lewis started coming on pretty clearly in the fifth and sixth rounds. I thought sixth round Lewis landed the bigger shots, started finally getting in there and inside working his magic, started getting to a point where he was actually doing something inside. And that overhand right that Klitschko previously had been ducking away from started kind of catching him, and then he got him with that uppercut. And yes, I thought that the stoppage was appropriate. Man, Vitali Klitschko could have lost his fucking eye if that thing could have kept going. And I know that that's like, you know, I don't want to exaggerate or be like a big baby, but that was it wasn't even one cut. It was like 3 separate cuts that were starting to converge. There were 2 over the top of his eye and 1 under his eye. And one, this never gets brought up, but you can see it in the post-fight interview. When Vitali Klitschko is getting interviewed, his fucking mouth is like, he can't even talk because he's going like this, licking his lips because his lips are cut. His lips are so split that he's like, it's awful. It's terrible. So yeah, dude, the fight definitely should have been stopped. Lewis, I mean, this is kind of just the debate surrounding this fight for me. Where were your scores when it should have been stopped, or, you know, when it was stopped, blah, blah, blah. But Lewis legally opened the cuts, definitely kind of outside legality opened them even more during the fight. No question about that. But basically outdid Klitschko and just barely for me. I mean, you know, it was obviously close, clearly a difficult opponent, but Klitschko's face was falling apart, man. It was really just, it was awful. And he still has some pretty bad scar tissue from that.
Yeah. And I mean, final punch stats, Lewis landed 52 jabs, Klitschko had 77. Power punches, Lewis had 120, Klitschko had 240. So exactly double landed. And, you know, the other thing, you know, last thing on this fight to sort of discuss is if this fight goes on, if there wasn't a cut, where does this go for you? How does this
It's a
unfold?
good
Because
question.
Lewis said, flat out, I would have taken him out. I was setting it. You could see I was going to take him apart or anything, which is just hubris to me. He was very defensive with Merchant, but I don't in any way put anything past him being able to take out Klitschko with a shot. I just think he was the much more fatigued fighter that I think that's unlikely, but I certainly don't take it away as a
Yeah,
possibility.
that's the argument. Lewis's fatigue and exhaustion versus Klitschko's face, which was clearly falling apart, but also it seemed to me, and I mean, anything can change, especially in heavyweight boxing, so you can't put your money on this, but it seemed to me that Lewis had started timing him, that he had started finding a rhythm where previously Klitschko was able to 1-2 him really well and kind of get that range, and Lewis had started finding his own. What that means, I don't know, because I mean, Klitschko was still there too. He could have still landed a shot in round 7. So, I mean, I would lean toward Lewis figuring it out just because of that's who Lewis was. And he already did figure it out. He figured it out in 6 rounds, but had it not been stopped, I think Lewis probably would have gotten it. But there's no question. Most difficult fight of his career in terms of styles and in terms of how it played out in the ring and having to really grit it out.
And I mean, the weirdest thing about this is that it was almost like it was seriously discussed that Jones could take Lewis and be favored going into that fight. That is what all 3 of these commentators say is, boy, like Roy Jones would be a mega fight. You'd kind of have to favor him after that performance. Really? You really think Roy Jones is
that's why Roy said I'll fight Lennox Lewis for $100 million, which is in effect saying I'm not fighting Lennox Lewis.
No. And I love Roy. I'm not trying to attack Roy, but Roy, we're saying Tyson and Lewis are different species of physicality. Roy said the same thing about fighting Tyson. He's just too fucking big. Like Roy is not a big guy.
Yeah, Buster Douglas was too. Remember back then when Roy was about to fight Buster Douglas, and they're like, "No, Buster's too big."
Yeah. No. So it's such an interesting fight to have. I mean, I think this era people kind of dismiss. I mean, the 90s is widely recognized as having these great fighters and interesting fights. And then there's sort of tributaries of the great fights that happen. But I think this one is really special. I think for the 2000s, both in commemorating Lewis's career and then launching into Vitali's career and then what Vladimir was able to do, it's a fascinating one to revisit. I mean, in the same way that I think the Bo Galata fight is so interesting. I remember watching that at the time it was happening and just being like, whoa, like I thought Bo was going to be the next great heavyweight, like what Eddie Futch said, like that he's the most talented fighter he's ever worked with. And he had all the tools to sort of, I thought, be a better Lennox Lewis. And it was like, oh no, he has no discipline and got really lucky in that. Not lucky, but I mean, he gave everything he had in that first Holyfield fight, and then he was never that ever again. Sort of as Tyson was after Spinks. We never saw that guy again. Like Spinks is the only person who ever fought that guy.
Well, and every fighter has that peak performance. We just don't know it until later on. We never know, is this all this fighter's got, and you never know.
Well, I mean, there's only one fighter where I think that's not true. Bobby Ches, where it's just a byproduct of having, an unscorable Mensa IQ, really. I mean, I think they need to redo the test just to accommodate that kind of intellect. How do I know that? Because he wore a towel that said Mensa on it.
That's true. And that's really the only way you can get that towel. That towel's not available at retail. So, there's only one way you're getting that Mensa towel. I will tell you.
The membership.
Exactly. I will say, as much as I love Lennox Lewis, and I was a big Lennox Lewis fan back when nobody liked him. But in any case, as much as I love Lennox Lewis, it was kind of screwed up how he did mess with Klitschko a little bit about the rematch and took a little while to retire. But I also don't blame him for retiring. And I will say I appreciate the fact that he hasn't come back.
I'm going to end on this note. The esteemed Thomas Hauser told me that he wrote Lennox's retirement speech. Lennox approached him and said, one question, in your opinion, Tom, if I retire today, is my legacy intact after this fight with Klitschko? And Tom said, yes, it absolutely is intact. Like you came back, you won this fight. There's nothing about a question mark in you not coming back for a rematch. It's okay to walk away. And Lewis said, okay, then I need you to work with me to write my retirement speech. So
I don't disagree with that.
No, I don't either. But that's where Lewis's mind was. And I don't know that that's ever been reported, but that's because Tom and I have talked about Lewis in terms of, how would he have done against these other guys? But that's exactly what Tom told me about where Lewis's mind was after this fight. I also agree with you. I don't like what he did to Vitali. I thought it was bullshit. But the guy's 38 years old. Do you want to come back at 38 to fight this guy? I mean, Klitschko was about to go on a serious run after this fight, just fucking annihilating Kirk Johnson, avenging his brother's defeat to Corey Sanders, blowing away Danny Williams, like just brutally fucking molesting him. Samuel Peter wipes him out. Shannon Briggs fight is really hard to watch, but I mean, Vitali had a lot left. So you wish that he had some better opponents to fight. You wish we had Vitali in the 90s fighting all those guys that Lewis fought just to see what would have happened. I mean, I think Klitschko would have fucking destroyed Tyson had they fought. I think Tyson knew after Lewis where he was really at relative to where he'd been. But yeah.
Yeah, I think that that's a pretty good point, dude. And I think that the heavyweight division was clearly going in a direction without a number of fighters, and it was Klitschko time, dude. It wasn't a clean handover, but it was as clean as it was going to get.
Yeah. This was fun. I really think we should encourage people to send us some messages about what other controversial fight would you like broken down and have a deep dive into, because there's so many that are out there, but maybe there are a lot that we don't even know about. So yeah, this was fun.
Yeah, totally. Yeah. And if anybody listening or watching has an idea, or, there's a fight that you just got in your head or have never gotten over or something like that, let us know. We will definitely take it into consideration and, watch it over, whatever. But Brin, dude, I appreciate you spending the time going over this again with me. It wasn't that difficult because it was a fun fight. It wasn't like it was a, difficult task or anything, but I appreciate it, dude. It was a lot of fun.
A lot of fun. Let's do it again.
For sure. Well, in the meanwhile, everybody who listened in or watched, really appreciate it. If you watched, for instance, on YouTube, I would appreciate if you subscribed and gave this video a thumbs up. If you listen, whatever podcast app that might be, also subscribe, give us a little rating or comment. Very helpful. If you are on social media, don't lie to me. I know you are. I'll find you, but find us, like my buddy Brin on Twitter, for instance, at Brinicio, Brinicio, me, Patrick Connor, Patrick M. Connor. And if you are on Facebook or Instagram, we're in those kinds of places too. Brin, we'll talk soon, bro.
Thank you, Patrick. Talk soon.
All right, everybody. Later.